well, then maybe this is going to be a very dangerous conversation. So little
Oh,
bit of
yes.
context. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't like to go scorched earth on like anything, but
Yeah, me
I
neither.
have a writing community called Legend Fiction for Catholic and
Mm-hmm.
Orthodox fantasy fiction writers. And the day that chat dropped and Midjourney dropped, I started using it. I'm now using these
Mm-hmm.
tools daily, and
Mm-hmm.
they're awesome. Yes, they
Yeah.
can be used badly, whatever. We'll get into that. But my community, because they're primarily authors, and then within the creative side of things, push back on the abuse of
Mm-hmm.
these tools was swift and severe, and it became morally virtuous to decry any sort of use of AI at
Yeah.
any part of the process, whatever. So I ended up
I love it,
being
dude.
quiet for
I,
about a year, and then I finally pulled a guy aside and had a conversation, decided, okay, the future of this organization, this brand, we are going to be AI, not agnostic, but maybe AI positive. What we're not going to be is AI negative. And then
mm,
that was like a breaking point for the community. Half of them went and joined a Discord server. And then I decided, F it, I'm just going to keep doing, I think this is the right thing to do. I think it's
yeah.
helpful. And I think there's a lot more people who want this. So
So that was a
seeing,
community you were hosting or running?
I am still running. Yeah. And it's
Oh,
still
okay.
doing
Okay.
better. We host an annual online convention. We have like, we're constantly growing and building that YouTube channel. And so it's still a thing. And
That's
those
amazing.
who've stayed are just genuinely, I mean, those who left are genuinely awesome people.
Yeah.
Just difference of opinion, difference of handling stuff.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so when I saw your thing about Notebook, Ellen, we'll just keep right on going here. I saw your thing about
Yeah.
Notebook and I thought, I checked into that for a minute, couldn't understand how I would use it. And so I didn't go back, and I saw you messing around with it. And then you're using AI in parish ministry. So before getting into all of that, first catch me up with what is this new cool project that you're doing? And then why are you leaning into AI as an amplifier for impact or just thinking? And then we'll get into all the weeds with, how we're overwhelming everybody with making sense of this crazy new world.
Yeah, I love that. So are we recording? Is this it?
Yeah, let's just keep right on going. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So man, I think we're gonna have a lot in common. So hopefully we don't become, one of those just like ranting because we're agreeing so hard with each other.
Why not? There's a cat video if somebody doesn't like it.
That's true. That's true. So well, let's see. Which should I start with? The zealous stuff. So
Yeah, start with a new brand. What's the new thing you're doing?
yeah, so it's a membership community for Catholic parish ministers to help them become directors or to think like directors. And in my experience, I felt like when I was in parish ministry, there were a lot of resources that talked about models or ministry theory, and there wasn't a lot focused specifically on the skills, disciplines, tools, frameworks to make you a really good director. So maybe an example would be if you wanted to be a creative director, but all the resources and tools out there were just about art history. And you're like, that's really great. That's helpful for my trade and for my skill. It helps me be a really awesome creative director. But like, what even is a creative director? How do I find a job? How does a creative director operate really efficiently and effectively? And like, what do I actually do throughout the rest of the week?
Right.
And then the other thing to start bridging over to AI, I think I foresee an increase in the value of community and connection. And I think we're seeing a decrease in the value of information is not as important as connection and frameworks and things like that. So I think the .com boom made information really valuable because it was like if you were there weren't any websites that explain the church's teaching. There weren't very many websites that explain the church's teaching on the Eucharist. Well, now there's probably millions being made every day. So the information's not as valuable. What's more valuable is the connections with people. And so, yeah, so that's the idea. It's a membership community for Catholic parish ministers. We have live coaching, workshops, tools and resources in there, and really specifically on becoming a really effective director.
Yeah. So let's keep getting into, so cool story, bro. That sounds good for you. What was the catalyst? What inspired that to get going into that, by the way? What's that story?
Well, it's like, as you know, probably with a lot of these things, it's a combination of a bunch of stuff. It's probably a combination of ADHD and necessity, and then also like personal mission and seeing a need. But I've always dabbled with entrepreneurial projects like yourself, and I'm coming up on the end of this 4-year project with Real Plus True. And I thought, let me see if I can create something that doesn't have to have thousands and thousands of people involved, but maybe could just
Mm,
serve
mhm.
100, 200 people. Um,
Okay.
and so kind of like yourself, like the early adopter. And so that's what started me down the path of AI, was just fiddling with it a little bit. And
Yeah.
I think we're similar. Are you among your community and friends normally the first person to hear about or try new apps, technology, tools, and
Oh,
things like that?
totally. Yeah. You ever heard of
Yeah.
Product Hunt?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Morning ritual every day, and
Wow.
check it to, what is possible, how, and then, yeah, constant list of the new things that are out there, and then testing them, field testing them, sometimes creating like an idea or a project to see what I can do with it. Um, and then a lot of times just shelving stuff until I've got a budget or a potential client to go actually back and test it on because I can't pay for it all myself.
Hmm.
But yeah, very much an early adopter. So ENFP, type 5, like on the Enneagram. So like to go really deep, really fast
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
with an ADHD superpower. So it's like really deep, really fast, get that nutrition, and then bounce into the next project. So
Hmm.
uh, very, very, like to move a lot faster than a lot of other people are able to keep up with, which is a problem, and why I'm pumped to be chatting with you, because it sounds like we're tracking along the uh, same thing.
Yeah, I want to make sure I answered some of your some of your other questions. You asked specifically about Notebook LM, or maybe the path of starting to get to using AI on a daily basis, or where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's. Okay, so you've prepped, or we now have a sense of what it is that you're working on. So let's talk about AI. What was your initial thought or experience messing around with it to that sort of leads you to where you are now, where you're incorporating it more intentionally, routinely? It's now more habitual kind of thing. What has your journey been with using AI, especially in the space that you're in, and some of the pushback that maybe you've been navigating?
Yeah, so I mean, at first I knew what I'd seen from headlines and things like this, and I kind of believed this mythical, superstition about AI. So I remember late one night,
In the
I was in
negative or
bed.
positive? Which superstition? There's a lot of them.
I was open to all of them, but I think just
Okay.
more. I think I overestimate. I'm like, this is a magical being that has every answer and is infinitely smart and infinitely knowledgeable, potentially.
Right, right,
So I was
right.
like, all right, this is at least how people are kind of talking about it. And then so the first time I used ChatGPT, it was late at night, and I was like, man, let me just download the app. And I stared at that blank text box for a while, just thinking, okay, if this thing could answer any question or
Mhm.
solve any problem, is infinitely smart, what would I ask it? And I was shocked at I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to ask first, like
Mhm.
um so obviously I went with what maybe a lot of people would do, is like, how do I make $1 million as quickly as possible, just to like see what it
Okay.
would say.
See, that's funny. I didn't do that one. Anyhow, keep going.
What was yours? What was yours?
I had genuinely trying to remember. I think I probably had it tell me a joke or tell me a story, usual stuff.
Oh, interesting.
And then
Hmm.
in that second, when I realized, wait, you can help, you can tell me stories. I now have a brainstorming buddy forever, and I can stop bugging all of my friends to like help me workshop these ridiculous, ludicrous, epic sci-fi fantasy things I want to tell. You can now help me figure out ideate characters, motivations, story arcs, plot holes, like. And so the chat's got that part of it that's
Oh yeah.
full
Yeah,
out.
you jumped a lot quicker than me to that, but that's a amazing use case for AI. I mean, so I first typed that in, and then realized, that AI is kind of like an annoying expert. If you ask an annoying expert a very general question, uh
Or any
how
average
what's the
college
mean.
professor, basically. It's like there
Yeah.
is no short
Yeah, yeah,
answer to
yeah.
whatever you've asked.
Exactly. And then often they'll say, it depends. So if you say, what's the easiest way to make a lot of money? It's like, it depends, or at least a more nuanced,
Mhm.
disciplined person would say that. So then I realized really quickly, okay, there's actually a lot more work that has to be done in what you ask. And it's a lot easier to, one of the frameworks that's helpful, or mental models, is if you had a infinitely smart assistant that you were working with, like an employee or an assistant or a team member,
Who's
you
stoned half the time, but anyhow.
who hallucinates sometimes, yeah, and needs some kind of like context first. And so a big shift in the next stage was like, instead of giving it a big project, breaking it down and having it help you at
Mhm.
individual stages. So
Right. Exactly.
the first step is coming up with a plan. So, so things like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, so flash forward. So I just started trying to give myself like a task or a reminder to do 5 minutes with it, because I knew there's kind of this pattern for me where, okay, I'm kind of excited about it, don't really understand it. So then I start getting less excited. It's confusing, not sure if it's helping. And if I
Mhm.
kind of just force myself to fiddle with it every now and then, pretty soon I'll start picking up on, oh, okay, now I'm kind of understanding how to use it a lot better. So flash
Mhm.
forward to today I'm maxing out my daily voice limit on ChatGPT, just talking to it,
Yeah, it
two or
keeps
three,
complaining.
4 hours. Yeah, yeah. So I use it a lot, and I find it
Mhm.
very fun and also very helpful and sometimes very scary.
Mhm. There is all that too. There's there are moments where I'll be using it and suddenly realize I'm not only hitting an overuse limit, I'm also hitting like an overuse limit for me personally,
Hmm.
where there's too much. How do you say this? Because you can sit down and chat with this potentially super intelligent thing, in air quotes, there's a, gosh, how do you say this? You start to kind of outsource a lot of your thinking and your intuition
Mm.
to it. And because you're offloading a lot of that processing and that creative part. So here's my thing. What I love about what AI does is it can eliminate or speed up the tedium curve,
Hmm.
because there
Hmm.
is, especially for hyper early adopters, maybe like you or I or something. There's a part of our workflow that is mind-numbingly just sort of soul destroying. Other people really thrive at it and they have the gifts for it. The rest of us absolutely hate every minute spent doing something that is boring. And from a human
Hmm.
thriving standpoint, I would argue I don't think humans are ever supposed to actually be doing this stuff anyway. And then on
Mm.
top of that, the way that modern culture is constituted and how online marketing and all of this stuff happens, there is so much time that you have to spend doing tedious stuff just because of how platforms and algorithms are put together and how stuff needs to be. You've got your core idea, then you got to deconstruct it into a variety of other different mediums, and then you have to rewrite it for being used in different places. And at that point, you're not actually being creative anymore. You're remixing, you're repurposing, and that's frankly insanely boring.
Hmm.
So what I love about what AI can do is it can speed up that process really quickly. It can eliminate the tedious part, uh, so that you're able to kind of keep more of that creative spark, and keep more of your creativity. Now, the downsides is when you do actually outsource it to figure out all your thinking, all of a sudden you are now inundated with a ton of information that you now have to try to process because it doesn't know what it's doing. It's trying to be helpful and just give you everything it thinks you asked for. Perfect case in point, which is why I'm so interested to chat with you. I think it's called The State of Create, just landed by
Ooh,
who is up behind that? Begins with a P.
is that
Patreon. Patreon
Patreon?
just
Yeah.
went and interviewed, I think, like 1,200 creators and asked them, what are you struggling with? What do you see as the future? As you're trying to build a life, and build income, and you're trying to manage and own your own audiences and stuff like that. What are you doing? What are you seeing? Fascinating document, loads of cool data. And then I think 2 days ago, circle.co dropped, I think they called it State of Community, where they went and did exactly the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I
And
I posted about that. I thought it was a really, really exciting report.
they both ended up actually giving a lot of the same data. It almost felt like a different designed readout of the same information. Anyhow,
That's a good point.
I took all of that stuff and then just ran it through chat and said, okay, now act like you're 79% smarter and predict the future. What happens 5, 10 years down the line with this? And boy, I ended up getting physically exhausted just trying to parse all the information. The major thing that stood out was, well, actually, kind of for this conversation, there's a bit of a brave new frontier going on with
Mm.
entrepreneurs, creators, startups, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. It's a post pandemic kind of world. Remote work has
Mhm.
been reimagined, maybe redefined. We're taken a lot more seriously. tools are getting more accessible. AI is like speeding up the adoption curve for how we can get stuff done. Because the major problem is, I think it's like 90% of small businesses die out in the first year, I think.
Mhm.
And then it's like
Mhm.
20% never make it past year 5 or something like that. Okay, some of them deserve to go, or some of them never really were that serious. Some really deserve to stay and just didn't get their fair shot or something like this. And I see a lot of tools like what AI is doing, making it far more accessible and easier for you to stick it out and win a little bit longer and just get started.
Mhm.
And I love that we have an edge. We can do things differently, more efficiently. I think I read also small businesses were like one of the top 4 employers in the country because one guy with an idea hires 3, 4 people. And, all of a sudden businesses are being created all over the place. And it's like, anyhow, I'm rambling a little bit. So this
No,
stuff is like on my
you're
mind. Like the state
100%.
of create is like a
Mhm.
huge deal. Kind
Mhm.
of why I'm starting my brand now, Start Your Saga brand, so I put that little book together and then I saw the work that you're doing. It's like, okay, let's, one, I guess like, there's still more to talk about. Where do we think it's going? How do we use it well? Problems and anyhow, what's chewing through your mind? What do you think at this point?
Well, yeah, I'm in full agreement with everything you're saying. And when I'm thinking about this, or starting to get overwhelmed, or thinking about the future, or how do I act? What decisions am I going to make today? Often I'll think about the past and how trends or new inventions or technology was adopted or perceived in the past. And when you were talking, I was remembering how excited everyone was at the beginning of the dot-com boom. It's like this is gonna change everything. This is
Yeah.
gonna be revolutionary. People need to learn how to do this. There's a huge advantage if you're early adopter, and I can imagine or see how it's going to be a similar thing in AI. The early adopters will overpredict the speed at which this will change society,
Mhm.
and the people that aren't quick to adopt it are going to underestimate how huge the impact is going to be.
Mhm.
And so I think that's one of the things I think about. And then two, in the beginning stages of the internet, it was a huge advantage to just be on the internet. I mean, if you were the only Catholic blog, you had a
Mhm.
huge advantage.
Yeah.
Excuse
First
me.
to the table. What is it?
Yeah,
First
and
mover
so
advantage, I think it's called.
yeah. Isn't there's like three, it's like you can either be first, be better, or there's something else. But I think, yeah, I mean, as more and more people are using AI, I think Google had a 2025 report on businesses, and they surveyed 1,100 executives at huge
Oh,
corporations,
interesting.
and
Okay.
like 80, yeah, and like 80% said that they're going to incorporate AI a lot more in the next 3 years.
Mhm.
So as AI becomes the electricity in the same way the internet has become in a lot of ways electricity, it's not enough to just have access to AI. You have to be skilled at how you use it,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you have to learn how to use it. You'd probably love this. One of the images or ideas I use a lot to think about this is Tony Stark in the Avengers Marvel movies. He has Jarvis, and Jarvis
Mhm.
is this artificial intelligence that he can cooperate with and do lots of cool stuff. Well, if you
Yeah.
just give Jarvis to my son who's 12, who's never used Jarvis, he's not going to be
Right.
as good at using this
Mhm.
super powerful being as Tony Stark is. And
Mhm.
also a lot of Tony's internal mental models and intelligence and thinking and the way he
Right.
approaches problems makes it more effective. So I think we have to build that skill of cooperating with something like AI tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, there's a lot there. Um, all right. Well, I'm just curious to keep pulling on that thread with you. Back over to you. So we talked about early adoption, and then how has it been? Um, how do you even say, like, you started leaning like really heavily now into your new project, leaning really intentionally into that this is a good if we can master not just it but ourselves and how we rely on this thing, like the same thing with a car or vehicle, right, or electricity. It's so funny. I was just chatting with my friend Gabe. We have our show that we do like every Monday mornings just to like decompress after the weekend and like try to psych ourselves up for another good week. And so we just chat for like an hour Monday mornings, and we were talking about AI and the use of AI and stuff. And this thought just came to my mind, which was, in the early days of electricity adoption, they were absolutely terrified because it was demonic, obviously. And
Yeah, yeah.
therefore, we're all going to keep relying on candles. And so it took a little while for that adoption. And then when it did, oh my gosh, you're destroying all of our jobs. The candle makers were up in arms. Same with like the Luddites and the printing presses and all of this stuff. I understand that there's a smart way to actually be going about anything, but it just
Mm-hmm.
seems that, and the founder of Ford once said that people would ask me to engineer a faster horse, and so I had to actually do a category shift and create something completely different. And so I
Mm-hmm.
gave them the car. And then what happened with the car? Like, why did people want a faster horse? Well, so that I can literally truck heavier loads around and get to places faster. And then he builds a car, which then of course requires highways. And then all of a sudden, you can like, it just creates an absolute shift in how a culture works, because now you can afford to have things like a fridge, and now you
Mm-hmm.
can afford
Mm-hmm.
to drive to the next town and pursue job opportunities you never could. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden people go like, well, I need a faster car. Heck, I need flying cars. Actually, can we just do jetpacks so that I can get to my job faster? And then somebody goes, well, what about the internet, and remote work? It's like, wow, we could, like you just said, the internet, the dot-com boom. And all of a sudden, it's like the world sort of closes in or like folds in upon itself. And you actually, like for me, I don't even need a car technically, because I've worked completely remote for the last, I don't know, 6 years now.
Mm.
I didn't need a faster car. Instead, the world sort of shifted. And then somebody goes, you introduce a smartphone, and then that again puts it's now like a completely mobile, not only workstation, but a life, so that you can maintain business and grow and do anything you want on the go. You can debate whether it's a good thing or not. And then it's like AI is introduced, and we're still kind of reeling because it's been an insane last 20, 30 years. And then in the sense that I get with AI, it's like showing up in the Middle Ages with, I don't know, a Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, people look at this thing, go, this would be a kick-ass greenhouse. I kid you not. And they have no idea what to do with this thing, because it's a culture shift moment. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
redefine and change a ton. And
Mm-hmm.
this is actually the last chapter I tried crafting in my book, which is the idea that I don't believe at any point that if people advocate any tool or mindset or process that bypasses the human and our personal ability to master a skill and learn to do something, partly because we enjoy it, mostly because we can and should, if everything is outsourced to tech and to tools, I never want that future. I don't think anybody wants it either. We all need
Mm.
the edge to lean in, to bite into, to build up, to face our own struggle, to level up by, getting into the struggle. So I think that we're often way too narrow yet with our focus. And we're going to get into all sorts of weeds here. Way too narrow yet with our focus on the power of this tool, because the temptation is to be very narrow-minded. It's just what we do as humans, is we think survival first, as opposed to
Mm.
there is an inordinate need to level up, to do an insane amount of good to help the rest of the world. That is just needed right now. That's one. Two, we are facing something like a demographic winter. So that means there's going to be a ton of people who will want to retire or can't. And there are not going to be enough service-based businesses to help and support them at all. And that's coming very quickly. Also, a lot of us are sick to death with how business and corporate structures are constituted at all. They're still built to handle a last century's methodologies and mindset, versus remote work plus what AI can bring to it, plus a human thriving mindset, almost a post Cold War kind of mindset, which is
Mm.
also sort of debatable. Anyhow,
Mm.
there's like too many, and then of course you and I being Catholics, sort of throwing in the human thriving component is essential to like everything. Because if you're not able to begin by being a good human being and to level up and to discover what it means to be human, and then to be able to, that whole side of like bringing Christ to life so that you can mediate him and who you are to others and all of this. If you're still not able to be a good human who can contribute and collaborate with other humans within the human family to contribute towards human thriving and, help do more good and alleviate suffering and all of this stuff, If that's not even happening and everyone's worried about Skynet, then I don't want that future. I don't think we do either. And this is one reason why I think there's a bet on us. And,
Mm.
this is a funny thing, right? The Romans, and I'll want to pass it back over to you in 30 seconds. The Romans built, if I understand this correctly, the highways because they needed consistent, predictable solution for getting their armies all across the empire. And everybody else goes like, oh, look, I could truck my donuts down that thing over to the next town. Or, this could actually really help everything, trade and economy and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, highways now take on a bunch of other uses that maybe they weren't initially intended for. And I may be oversimplifying. But if we look at a tool that is introduced for one specific thing, and then all of human sort of creativity looks at that and goes, hey, we can do all of this with it. And I think of like crypto and blockchain decentralizing fiat currency, and like no bank ever predicted that they would lose potential control over the finances, at all. And then for people to go, no, I'm tired of this. I can actually invent a new situation. And if I can get enough buy-in, the future's different. It's a brave new frontier, right? That was a mess. What's going through
No,
your
no,
mind?
that was great. I agree. I think it's a really exciting time. I think a highlight of what I think AI is going to do is similar to COVID when everyone either was mandated or just had to work from home. We're still having the ripple effects of people kind of waking up to maybe the systems or the way of doing things doesn't have to be the way it is. So is it required that I have to go into a job in order to work? So I think a lot of I think the reason early adopters or entrepreneurs kind of will be thriving in the next couple years is because we're naturally questioning the systems that are put in place as opposed to just saying, no, this is how it's always been done. We're the ones that are saying this doesn't someone decided this is how it should be done. So I think a lot of I don't know if you're familiar with the work Seth Godin is doing recently on strategy and talking about systems, and I'm
Oh no, I
seeing
not
systems
actually.
thinking. Yeah, systems thinking and just like systems in general, talking about it, at least for me, is coming up a lot on YouTube. And this idea that, being an author in the book writing world, I mean, that's a system and there's inputs and outputs, there's motivating factors. But to
Mhm.
acknowledge that you're actually in a system, see also The Matrix and Fight Club and these things. And I think there's a bigger movement happening where more and more we're realizing there are systems in place, and did we intentionally put them there? Have we agreed to be part of them passively? So with AI, it's suddenly going to be a similar situation where okay, well now you're going to be faced with a lot of freedom. So how do you want to structure your life? And I think
Mhm.
it's exciting for Catholics or for anyone who has a philosophical, metaphysical worldview,
Mhm.
because it just highlights, okay, why are you deciding this? And it really
Mhm.
forces you to go back to first principles and go, well, what is the purpose of being alive? Well, like
Right.
how would if I could shape my life hour to hour every day exactly how I wanted it, how would I and why?
Mhm.
And so I think it's a really exciting thing, especially if you're Catholic, you have a
Mhm.
worldview,
Mhm.
you have a stance on this.
Right.
You take, for example, like self-driving cars, you have engineers that are just excited about, is it possible to build it? Well, very quickly they're realizing that, or they had realized like there's a lot of philosophy that goes into how you build this car, in a situation where it's having to choose two lanes to avoid a collision. Is it choosing the lane with an elderly civilian in the way or a young person in the way? These are all philosophical questions that lead back
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
like, what's the definition of a human person?
Yeah. Yeah. No, but hmm, too many thoughts. So it's kind of funny. My wife and I have been looking at music generators, right? Because we're
Mm,
not music producers. Um, and there's a delightful part of AI in that it's democratized elements of creativity to people who either will never actually be creative or have the time, but it can help short circuit an ability to communicate a dream that they have or an interest that they have that might actually kick off, you know, a path to mastery later on. So anyhow, we were talking about generating music and stuff like that, and some of the lawsuits and the fun that's going on around all of that stuff, and people are mad and so on. And and then the realization that it's like, just because you can generate content, I think that there's always an early honeymoon period with any new tech, any new thing. It's like, oh, everybody, give everybody a car, and for the past 100 years, like, did everybody actually need a car? Does everybody actually want one? Like, what did that do to human culture when you give everybody a car? All right.
Mm.
Well, if this idea that just because we can, let's go ahead and do it. And AI
Hmm.
can now, for example, generate 500 new, I mean, it's on the low end, 500 new audio tracks, brand new songs. You can have these Instagram, AI influencers, which is the dumbest concept I think ever, especially when they have nothing actually real to contribute at all. And then you have AI influencers in music, and then Spotify, I think, is clamping down on those. And it just gives me this. I don't know if you've ever played this game called Counter-Strike, and I'm a very bad player,
Mhm.
but I grew up with it, so it's got a
Years
special
ago,
place
but
in my
yeah.
heart. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So I got back into it the last 6 months or so, and started making friends and kind of having fun and skilling up and stuff. And then I remember jumping into a server at one point, and they booted me almost instantly.
Hmm.
And I thought, wait, what? Like, I was like, my ego was hurt, of course. It's like, well, why? Oh, maybe because they're all pros and they don't want a noob messing up their stats or something. And so then I had to Google, like, why did that happen? Because I didn't even get a chance to get in there and see who is in there. And then people said, no, sometimes there are these. So people will authorize bots to go in and play on their behalf to skill them up so that they can collect drops faster, something like that. And I thought,
Mm.
okay, what an absolute waste of your time in the game. But okay, whatever.
Hmm.
If you want to do that, be dumb. Like, we've played with these kind of things. They look like Terminators. They walk around. They're slow. They're insanely accurate. They're hard to bring down. So these things just booted me as soon as I came in because they wanted a bot-only server. Well, there was another point where I jumped in and I found these bots, and they had glitched and completely forgotten the point of the game. And they were all literally standing in an alley corner, and they were all pointing their guns at the wall, and they were not doing anything. And I was
Mm.
walking around this ghost town, and all these bots just staring at the wall. It almost felt like a Black Mirror episode, and I
Yeah.
jumped out. And so it got me thinking about the whole dead internet theory and stuff like that. Okay, where am I going with all of this? The idea that you can create semi-autonomous things that can create or effectively hallucinate and regurgitate, stuff. Do we want that at all, ever? Or do we want to
Mm.
empower something to learn so that it can be an on-demand, maybe tutor or facilitator to help eliminate the sort of tedium process so that I can create the thing that I have a dream for that I will never in one lifetime build up the skills to do because I don't know, I'm in hospital, or I work a 9 to 5, or I will never have a chance to go to college or something. But this tool can help me short circuit an ability to communicate in a way that I never could. Early in the days of when AI art or generative art was introduced, there's a lady, what's her name? Adobe ended up hiring her. I think her name is Chris. Anyhow, she came up with this description of the value of why AI art can be a good thing. Yes, it can be a truckload of sludge, and I absolutely hate that because I love what the tool can do. So I hate how it's just there's so much garbage out there. But she said, with the advent of AI art, it's put into the hands of everybody the ability to visually communicate their dream.
Hmm.
And if we like, artists are like 1% of the human family or something like this, they will always not, they always were kind of a luxury item. With AI art, every artist has now overnight become a luxury commodity, right?
Mm.
In an irreplaceable way. But what AI art, it really is a tool, an entry level tool for people who could never learn a discipline of creating art. How many of us, what happens to the human family when an average person living anywhere in the world is suddenly equipped with tools to communicate things that they're passionate about, that they struggle to articulate, they struggle to illustrate? For most of human history, it's like you're SOL. There's nothing you can do, and you're definitely
Mm.
not getting a patron's ear. Well, now
Hmm.
anybody anywhere can, yeah, it still takes some discipline, can start
Hmm.
visualizing what they're thinking, can get help to articulate. It's like a David and Goliath kind of thing. You can step out of nowhere and maybe things can happen. You can become an influencer, you can help reshape your local economy, you can contribute to the human family. It is such a different, there's a dignity. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Actually, push back on this or challenge me on this. But I think that a tool like this can contribute towards the dignity of people who have things to contribute and would have never been able to before. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to take a more morally, I tend to lean often with these tools as, I don't know if morally neutral is the right word to use, but it's more like it's a thing, it's out there. I can't really seem to stop the rolling out of it or the adoption of it. Like, it's going to be a thing everywhere. And like the internet or like the invention of a digital camera, there's gonna be pros and cons. There's gonna be malicious ways you could use it that violate the dignity of the human person. There's gonna be tons of upside as well. Um, and I'm thinking about, yeah, like really in my mind, for some reason, the way I think about it is just like it's always been the same conversation.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
sure
Yeah.
I'm sure there were conversations after the invention of the printing press where people were saying, "Well, this is just going to make people not really appreciate." It's like to your point earlier about horses and cars. Like it's the same conversations and concerns,
Mhm.
and then you find afterwards, for us living in a post digital world, yeah, I mean, we understand some of the concerns, but we're also like, it's actually not that big of a problem. Like it's not as big
Mhm.
of a problem as maybe we thought. I do think though that, and this has always been the case. I do think it just highlights more and more that there are lots of parts involved in the way we judge value in anything. So that maybe that doesn't make sense, but like if you take a painting, there's like the physical material thing itself. Like
Mhm.
there's an objective painting. Um, and then there's my experience, my story, my reaction to it, how I'm perceiving it, how I'm connecting it, and it's similar or different than my experiences. And then there is also something about the story of how the painting was made. So you could have a song that you really like and then find out that it was created by AI. I mean, there is something to the story of how a painting was made. I mean, for example, we could think of a scenario where you walk into a museum and you go, "Oh man, this is my favorite painting," and then years later, finally ask one of the museum curators, like, "Hey, what's the story behind this painting?" And it's like, "Oh, we found a rare a rare painting that's from Hitler's collection when he was painting, back when he was a young child." Suddenly, it
Right.
changes the whole story. It's like, wow, oh, okay. So, but
Yeah.
but so I think it's always going to be the case. And then the last thing I'll say is, it's just continuing to highlight the need for curation and connection. And what I mean by that is,
Mhm.
when you only had one, let's say news website,
Mhm.
it was very easy to just say, I'm either reading it or I'm not, and I have opinions about it or I don't.
Mhm.
Now there's millions of options for news sites, or let's say like, YouTube channels or whatever. Well, what becomes important is who is curating this stuff? How are you finding it? And I
Mhm.
think in that world, what becomes more and more important is something the YouTuber, I forget his actual name, but Vsauce. I remember him talking about this decades ago,
Oh yeah.
saying that curation is actually a really,
Mhm.
really valuable skill. Like being a librarian
Mhm.
of art, or I mean, if you have really good taste in a certain particular type of painting,
Mhm.
people gravitate towards you and they want you to curate the vast amount of information or options of paintings
Mhm.
out there. And so
Right.
that's where like the connection, the story behind the painting or the art or the writing
Mhm.
becomes important. And so I think we will for sure have. I've been wondering at what point an AI song will make it to the top 10 like Billboard chart or whatever. I'm
Mhm.
sure they're putting in place some things where they don't want to accidentally make that like name it,
Mhm.
some AI song, but I'm sure it will happen. And
Mhm.
then kind of similar to the way we view Christopher Nolan, where we're like, that's really cool that he shoots on analog. That's a cool
Mm.
story. Like he
Yeah, yeah,
only
yeah.
shoots movies on analog, but there will just be we'll just see them as different things. Like, okay, this art was
Yeah.
made by an AI. This art was made by a
Mhm.
human and AI. This art
Yeah.
was made by a guy out in a field who dug up all of his, tools, or I don't know, he created his tools by hand. Like there's story and meaning, and it's always going to be valuable. The story and
Yeah.
meaning behind the things that we do.
Yeah. You know what's also fascinating about that is how we're at a point in human history where, how do you say this? The value of our creative output now is depends on the context and circumstances, right? So in the past, like Homer and the Odyssey, and right, if you were a musician, so okay, it was a big deal. Like you not only took it very seriously, you didn't really mess around with a lot of this stuff. Everything was very religiously, involved. And then over, course of time, you start to get kind of the last, and this is the well, not the last, but you get something like Dante writing the Divine Comedy, and for the first time, he's like abstracting out of theology to create this massive theological, fictive, spiritual investigation epic, which was not meant to be read in the context of the liturgy, but it was meant to be a meditative, explorative, mythical sort of thing. And then fast forward to today, you have someone like Tolkien and everybody else creating full on fantasy sub creative worlds that are absolutely not intended to be liturgically involved, but are a collaboration with one's own creative genius and whatever. Where am I going with this? It's like not everything is created equal. So you can have someone like you said, Christopher Nolan, right, creating really epic storytelling, and then you have stories that are or content that is created that's was never intended to be massive and that valuable and high level and stuff. So it's like music in an elevator, right? It's not ever meant to be of the quality and the intentionality of not only like liturgical music or even a concert music or even a live performance. It's literally meant to be running in the background. And
Mhm.
so you don't need that kind of music to matter as much. And so this is what I
Mhm.
find is so interesting because we've now empowered a lot more people to be creative. We've also redefined the demands of creativity and the demands of quality. And I don't know where that conversation goes, but it's just interesting. A little side thought, because you sort of brought this up about talking about AI. Well, I did too. Dan Koh is a creator I like to follow, and he put out an article or a video 1 or 2 weeks ago talking about how the advent of AI was actually the best thing for creators ever
Mhm.
because it if you remember in the early days of the dot-com boom, everybody was trying to game the SEO system and they were churning out sludge. And very quickly,
Mhm.
everybody was mad, and Google saw people were mad because there was no real actual value in what was being surfaced up because they were gaming the system. So
Mm.
Google found a way to downplay that and to surface actual valuable, stuff that was either carefully branded or real stories or it was skyscraper content and outperformed everybody else because there was more real value. Well, now all of a sudden with AI coming in, it can generate everything that you need really fast. You put in your website, it'll create 500 articles. And now the question is very quickly going to become who actually wants this? Apart from the dead internet where bots talk to bots, I learned this semi horrifying stat, I don't know, about the cables that are run across the Atlantic and how one guy, this tiny little group of people who are charged to keep these wires alive, and it's a nightmare that nobody wants to go
Oh,
work in this business. Anyhow,
that's scary.
they said that 60% of internet traffic through these wires is just bots talking to bots, right?
Interesting.
And it's just it's fascinating. So there's a game that can be played. This is like elevator music at the level of content that you play this to maybe rank your thing so that I don't know you're more likely to be recommended, but you don't actually want people reading this stuff. You want people actually reading your podcast or watching your podcast or something, because that's where you go real. Again, interesting conversation. Danco's point was, with the advent of all of this, sludge, actual creative stuff is going to very quickly, like it always does, rise to the top. And when I say creative, I mean it's more human, it's more intentional, it's real stories, the stuff that's irrepeatable. All of this sludge is going to mean we're going to be exhausted and we're going to look for reality. At first, we're not going to be able to tell, but then we're very quickly going to start to see the patterns, or stuff is going to get categorized. Now, I want to come back to something that you said about the conversation staying the same. You took that one way and my mind went a different way. And I want to hear what you think about this. So,
Yeah.
two thoughts. One is, there's a very challenging book by a progressive anarchist named Guido Peperata called Empire and Church. I just had the conversation with a friend on this on my personal YouTube channel. His central point is that he studied how parasites work on the natural world. And he had to do this for some research he was doing, I think with the World Health Organization or something, I can't remember. Anyhow, he said that he had to spend ages watching live footage of how parasites glom onto these other things and the brutal way that these things work. And we don't have to get into all of that, but wasps and spiders and so on, they produce nothing. They never will, but they feed off of the genius and the creativity, the very life, the bodies of all of these other things. And they create entire structures and hives and networks and whatever based off of the output of, let's say, everything down at the bottom layer, right? So again, these things are not creative. They are a parasitical class that are insanely smart, insanely intelligent. So his contention is that a lot of what the power structures in our human culture at large function in exactly the same way they are parasitical inside or outside religious structures. A lot of them also operate the same way. They produce nothing. They feed off of the rest of us and so on. Well, this reminds me of something I learned about ancient Egypt. And it's, first of all, it's the stunning fact that ancient Egypt preserved itself as a consistent culture for over 4,000 years, I think. If not a little longer or a little less, doesn't matter. I found out a reason why not only they did that, but why it's also insanely smart. Because they believed in reincarnation. What you want to do after a 2,000-year window, that's when you're supposed to come back, you want to come back to something consistent. You want to come back to your own, if we were to reincarnate, if you want to come back 2,000 years from now, we have no idea what the future would be like. But if you're a pharaoh, you want to create a super system where art and liturgy and language and human ritual and everything stays the same, forever. Now, they also had fascinating moral, from their vantage point, moral reasons where they genuinely believed, and there's some good to this, that they were expressing eternal truths within time. They were embodying the bodies of the gods within structures of buildings and liturgy and ritual and so on. So there was a divine mandate for them to be mediating and communicating the realm of the gods in the chaos of time that we lived in. So there were very good reasons to create.
Wait,
Go ahead.
real quickly, with the reincarnation, was that something that all? I know that the pharaohs in particular were like, they need to do these certain things in order to be reincarnated. If I was just a regular person, was the belief that everyone could potentially reincarnate? Because if so, I could see how everyone would participate in we need to keep these traditions and keep everything the same so that thousands of years from now, like you said, it's the same society I'm being reincarnated into.
Here's my read on it. It's not just the pharaohs who came back. Everybody comes back. So if we think in a pre-Christian mindset, because there's no way to get out, you come back until you level up. So the caste system, for example, either Hinduism or Buddhism, you repeat until you level up in virtue, until you detach from the things holding you back, and you achieve unity with the all, with actual reality and not your idea of reality. Well, Egypt had exactly the same thing. That's why the Egyptian Book of the Dead, oh, what a side tangent, is this beautiful confession, before the feet of the gods of I intentionally tried to be the best that I could at every single point of my life. Because the goal is I'm trying to earn my way into heaven. Okay, pre-Christian, I'm trying to humbly sort of grasp at goodness and sort of get up. Well, you see this with like the Vikings, for example, where the average common person would be like, well, hey, if I jump into the grave with you and I serve you through the entirety of my life, I can kind of grab in on your coattails and sort of get in faster. So that's why you see a lot of this in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we can keep
Well, and
pulling on that
there's
if you
a
want,
whole.
but
Well, no, that's really fascinating because there is a whole time period before there is a whole time period in human history where it wasn't commonly just understood that society would change. The idea was, yeah, I
the
mean,
whole
things are
point
gonna
was to
stay.
not
Yeah,
change.
it's just hundreds of years of like,
Yeah.
yeah, things are gonna be this way all forever, and the idea of progress and history, or the idea of progress and that
Mhm.
the I think it's so important what you said about like the idea that we haven't often examined, that we just believe implicitly that 20, 30, 50 years from now everything will look completely different. To imagine a world where everyone didn't understand that as common sense, like
Yeah.
what would a world look like where we
In
just
especially I think the
implicitly believe it's going
pre-Christian.
to stay the same.
Yeah, I think in a lot of the pre-Christian cultures, and we sort of get this today, the feeling is that we who live in time are like sliding down a slope away from where we want to be, and we're kicking
Mm.
and scrabbling against this slide. And so
Mm,
the
mm,
idea of a future and of change was like bad because you're trying to get back to the original good. Are you familiar with an author named Owen Barfield? He's one of the Four
mm-mm.
Inklings. No, fascinating character. There's a whole conversation. Okay, where do I not want to go?
Sorry, I'm taking notes. I'm not.
No, 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 that's
I
fine.
was writing down that
So
name.
here, okay, I'm getting to my back to my original point, and it's this. It's that he, the human thing, the human person, we're continuing our process of development, our process of evolution, and
Mm,
the incarnation of Christ and the genius of Christ and his being into human history was a catalyzing shift to that started to change the human person. This is why we have a view of the human person before Christ and then after Christ moving into the present. One of the
mm,
major things that changes is an increase in interiority, is an increase in individuation, personal autonomy, intellect, conscience, right? Before this time, you would have specific figures who would be championing that kind of interiority. The average human person didn't. The average human
mm,
person had a lot more of a hive mind, of a group think thing
mm,
going. This is actually why you could have at that time like an empire situation that would last 4,000 years and everybody would
mhm,
basically be like, this is normal, this is reality. But then you get something like the advent, the incarnating of Christ, and then now 2,000 years later, we're now a different kind of human person. There's a lot more of an individual conscience, of an ability for us to separate ourselves from the herd, to become ourselves, like a child growing into a teen and separating from the family so that they can then re-engage or integrate with the family as a free adult. This is a
mm,
necessary part of human development, all right? So here's when you said the conversation has always been the same. It's like, oh, this is what's running through my mind because, like, up until, and AI is not like sacramental answer to all of this, but the conversation has stayed the same because these parasitical classes and whatever continue to try to perpetuate the what has always worked, the methodology of empire, of systems, like you're talking about Godin and his strategies and stuff. That's the way that we make the world make sense. And then all of a
mhm,
sudden you
mhm.
get stuff like blockchain and crypto and AI, and all of a sudden an average person in Bucharest or I don't know, Bolivia, an average person now has access to tools that allow them to individuate
Hmm.
maybe build up a following, maybe become somebody new, maybe push back and create something that nobody ever would have taken have stepped up to do. It's like this is a watershed moment in human history where, because we value human thriving and individual conscience and individuation, all of a sudden we've created tools that allow us to do this. It's not just like take it to the system and fight back against the man. It's not so much about that. It's that we're now able to create what we are moved by, the things that are valuable by, and we're not always just phoning it in because somebody else created a worksheet and a checklist to define your life.
Hmm.
That was a whole lot.
No, no,
What do you
it's
think?
like, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, in the, you know, in the West and in any, yeah, in a capitalist society, but especially, I guess I'll just speak for the U.S., but it's a lot of other countries too. But I mean, the U.S. was all of its systems are kind of built on capitalism, but also the Industrial Revolution. So like the public
Hmm.
education system was kind of manufactured with the, well, manufactured is a funny word to use, but like it was created with the assumption that we need people to have a certain level of skill in order to be good employees within a system that,
Hmm.
and that valued and prioritized certain skills, or I guess maybe you'd say habits of compliance, that are very different in a world where there is much more freedom, and you need to be like intrinsically motivated as opposed to externally motivated. So like what you're talking about right towards the end there, that like there's less and less a plan that you can just follow. There's less and
Hmm.
less here's the system. I heard some people talking about the fact that the middle class is not something that always exists in every society. It has to be
It's
intentionally
true.
created. And
And
so
maintained. You have to, exactly.
yeah, and so I mean, yeah, it's an amazing time to be alive, because you can imagine AI giving us the freedom to make our lives look more or less exactly how we want them. So then the question becomes, how do you want your life to
What do
look?
you
And
want? Are
yeah,
you sure you actually want that? Yeah, and
exactly.
then
And I
field
and
test it really quickly instead of waiting generations to see the outcome of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think that's going to be. I think this is why I talk so much and get really, obsessed with frameworks. And a lot of the things we're talking about are, metacognition and thinking about how we're thinking. Thinking
Hmm.
about how we think about things. And I think more and more that's going to become really important, and something that we need to be concerned with is, how do we arrive at the answers and conclusions? Sometimes that's more important than the answers or conclusions. I mean, just to reference what we talked about earlier, like the painting is really important, but also how the painting was
Hmm.
made and
Hmm.
why it was even
Yeah.
made. And I think
And
in
also
a
what you
world
expect
where,
to get out of it, your
yeah,
expectations around it.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, and what was the intention? So in a world where there's almost an infinite number of movies to watch, it becomes important what your philosophy and definition of a movie is. It becomes important,
Hmm.
like what is your intention for sitting down to watch a movie? And
Hmm.
you could have lots of different intentions at different points of the week, but that becomes really important, and that's cool. Like it's cool that this technological revolution is forcing us to think a lot more about these kind
Hmm.
of first principles and our primary definitions of things. Like,
Yeah.
what is a
Yeah.
movie? What is
Yeah.
entertainment? Why am
Yeah.
I why do I want to be entertained, and what is it I actually want, as opposed to relying on other people or
Hmm.
institutions or systems to tell me what
Hmm.
this is, to tell me
Hmm.
what entertainment is. Entertainment is you sit down and you laugh or you cry, um, we're able to kind of take a step back and ask those questions, and then make a decision that informs how we spend our time or structure our
Hmm.
lives.
Hmm. Yeah. This whole focus on metacognition, the framework of things. Um, well, so case in point is working. And there's moments, right, where I'm sitting here and I'm working and I'm realizing I don't want to spend the next 50 years doing exactly this, day in, day out, just rinse and repeat forever, just because somebody came up with, here's a strategy for a way you can do stuff and I can give you money for it. And okay, now this is part of the creative side. Like we talked about the Industrial Revolution, and I'm just thinking like there's specific kinds of people. Like I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram. I love how it creates the 9 different types of people. There are specific kinds of people who never want to be creative, and that's a good thing. They do want systems, and they do want really predictable, habitual things so that they can create a space of freedom for just the one little thing that they do want to focus on. Right now, that's not you and me. We would probably hate and be the Luddites within the Industrial Revolution, because we're like, we don't want the entire culture all funneled into factories. And then for that to be the defining mode of output. I want my microbrewery, or my little artist colony or collective. You would never have Michelangelo in a factory. He's just this insane ADHD, multiple polymath thing. Where am I going with this? The ability to, darn, I lost my train of thought. Not just
Well, I think
create your own
you're,
future. And I don't want to
yeah,
be
well,
stuck.
well, yeah, and I think you're highlighting that some people, I mean, see like the movie Office Space, The Matrix, these things, like some
Yeah.
people are just passively in the system, not realizing that even to passively be in it is a decision to be in it.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. It's a good point that there's all of these possibilities, and there are going to be people that say, I don't want to, every time I sit down to watch a movie, have to define what the heck a movie is. But it is the case that it is the case, though, that when they open up whatever will be the thing that they open up, they are
Mhm.
they're consenting to being part of
Yeah.
that system's definition of the world and the human person and entertainment. And I think it's just something that the church will continue to raise awareness to, is like,
Mhm.
even if
Mhm.
you're passively just agreeing to capitalism as a structure that, okay, well, I don't want to think about it. This is just a structure I'm in. I mean, you are to some degree responsible for that decision to participate in it. And
Mhm.
there might very well be a time in our lifetime where money is not the main base primary motivator and incentive for everything. I mean, there was a
Mhm.
time in history where it was food. Like
Right.
food was it. It was like,
Right.
how do you get food? Everything I'm doing is about I'm either in the process of getting food, or I'm eating food and storing food for later. And
Mhm.
and that has been changed over now to money is like the thing to survive. But what about a world where the money is no longer? I mean, do we go back to an agrarian society? Like, what do we do in a system or a structure where
Yeah.
that's not the prime motivator?
Yeah. See that right there, that fascinates me. That's my ongoing question. Like, what is the ideal sort of living condition for a human person? So that question right there about frameworks, we start to wrap up here. So the question about frameworks, then, how many of us are you know, born into born into this world, born into a system that we might not have chosen a mental model or a system if we knew what it was we were, buying into. I'm thinking of like people born during let's say, the early Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain, and perhaps as much as they might have, I don't know, rebelled or struggled with it, maybe those who bought into it and go, this is just reality, right? Well, how many of us, as good as we also have it in the First World West, there's still a lot of stinking thinking and the meta level of framework that still does not yet contribute towards a central idea of why are we here at all as humans, and instead the way a lot of us are treated, in the culture at large, is that, well, you exist because you're a consumption unit, and you exist to, provide some sort of an output, and then I don't know, take or buy something, and then have kids. I think,
Hmm.
as opposed to something which is more the church's social teaching. But honestly, it's not even just the church. It would be a lot of other, religious frameworks, which would be the human person is a good in and of itself, just to be here. And so why are you here is not just to continue to perpetuate whatever good, or well, especially not negative, but whatever good system you're in. That's not actually why you're here. You are here to discover yourself, to level up, to, by the doing of good and the eliminating of let's say suffering, to discover what it is that you're supposed to contribute to yourself and to the world. And by that process, you're discovering what aspect, let's say, of God you're You're here to communicate or to mediate or discover, you know. So what happens even when you have a group of people who put that as the foundation for whatever we're trying to solve? This is the bedrock idea that human living is good, human thriving is vital, and that every person has an infinite dignity and must engage in their own life and not phone it in like a couch potato. So
Mm.
now you take this constellation of tools that we've crafted over the last 2,000, 10,000 years, and now you put them all at the service of that. And here's, I guess, so here's my contention. Like you said, well, I'm riffing off on what you said. Conversations remain the same 10,000 years. It's been the same
Mhm.
conversation that most
Mm.
of us would not want to continue. And now all of a sudden, this is the watershed moment of human history, I think. Within a single lifetime, it's possible, or there's a chance to kind of break free or to do something different. Not just like define the meaning of your own life, but create a space of freedom where you can figure out what you're supposed to be doing, what is a good thing to do, which is kind of like bringing your own dream to life or
Mm.
corresponding with the action of the Holy Spirit, doing the maximal good that you can, rediscovering or return to meaning. Um, there's a whole massive conversation, I'm sure. I'll end
Yeah.
there. Closing thought
Well,
based on that.
yeah, I think what I'm taking away from this, especially this last half of the conversation, is I think you're right. I think for certain personality types, more freedom and creativity and self-expression is really exciting. For people like us who could sit down with a glass of scotch and talk about these things for hours and hours without getting tired, I think it's really exciting. I think you're right, though. There are people where that seems really overwhelming, and it seems like I don't know how to operate in a world where I have to define everything.
Mhm.
And so maybe a takeaway or encouragement is for if you feel that way, if you're listening and feel that way, is just to spend a few moments every now and then just asking yourself, what do you believe, or what's important, and spending a little bit of time um, thinking and discerning, where did that come from. So
Mhm.
I really value friends. Like, where does that belief or value come from? What is it? Can you go deeper than that? What is it? What is it about your life? I really like the work of Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind. And it's about moral intuitions and why good people are divided about politics and religion and things like that.
Mm.
And I like kind of what he sets forth is that we have a lot of moral intuitions, and one of the first steps is just being even aware that we have those things. We have these things we
Mhm.
believe are
Mhm.
right or wrong, or good or bad, that we've never stopped to analyze, like, well, why? Like, why do I believe that? And
Mhm.
sometimes maybe you've had this in conversations with people where it can get kind of frustrating because they just say, well, it's just not right, or it's
Yeah.
that's just a good thing. And just taking a little bit of time, like journaling or writing down and just thinking, what are some things I do believe? What are some things that are non-negotiable for me, or things that I really, really hold valuable? And then going a step deeper to, like, why? Why is it that I believe that? So I think it doesn't have to be an overwhelming, like, defining reality. I think you'll end up in some depressing part of a philosophy department at a college somewhere with a bunch of people questioning whether or not they exist. You can go too
Yeah.
far in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but taking a few things, like, what's one thing that I believe, and why do I believe it, and where does that come from? And I think that would be helpful for people.